Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today I am live from Jagex HQ, joined by the Combat Council, or members of the Combat Council. I've got mods Pi, Ramen, Ryan, and Sponge here with me today, and we're going to be talking about learning PVMing and a lot of the thought process that goes into the way the combat system works and feels and is learned in 2022.
Hi, I'm Mod Pi. Senior gameplay engineer now. They keep on changing my title. I work a lot in combat.
I'm Mod Ramen, also known as Kyle. I am a senior content developer. I've worked at Jagex for 9 years now, and I've worked on a large array of boss content and Slayer creatures.
Hey, I'm Mod Sponge. I've worked at Jagex now for 4 or so years. Originally as QA, now I'm content developer. Frequently doing rewards at the moment, do a lot of combat stuff. But if you're using a reward at the moment, it's probably made by me.
Hey, I'm Mod Ryan, principal content developer, and of all the combat updates I've worked on, the famous Great Ricochet, as everyone loves to talk about, and then things like Raksha, Zuck, Soul Reaper, things like that.
So RuneScape, I think it's a very, very old game, and the combat system has been consistently evolving since the evolution of combat. And I think over time it's gotten a little more complex, definitely from where it initially was. And along with that, I think comes potential, difficulties with learning it, because all of a sudden, instead of learning something very simple, which is you have 8 or 9 different abilities and there are only so many different things you can do and press, as you continue to tack on different abilities, or maybe a potential switch, or a potential, new interaction or new content or power creep, the complexity goes up and increases. And I think there's a sentiment among players that the game at this current stage is a lot more difficult to learn and understand than it maybe had been in the past. So if we could just go around the room, I'll start with Mod Pi. How do you feel about the learnability of RuneScape in 2022 or in current year?
It's a difficult one to ask, right? So when we're approaching it as a designer, you say learn the combat system. It's not just like this one solution fits all thing. We see it as very much as like a learning journey. It's a better way to put it. So when you're saying learn to be like an end game hyper sweaty DPS PVMer, that is a very different question to brand new player just learning the game.
Yes.
To be sweaty PVMer, I'm not happy with where our learning is, but more kind of how the complexity surfaces itself, I think is the better way to put it, or the knowledge of those complexities actually existing. Like in terms of like what the game actually provides you, it's much better when you start going away, right?
Off of RuneScape, yeah.
Off of RuneScape, right? So you probably see on streams, I just go PVME Discord. Like don't even ask me, just go to the PVME Discord, right? Because those channels are just...
Absolutely, and to maybe expand on that a bit, I think the best resources specifically for learning PVMing in RuneScape are external to the game. And I think part of that is you've got a fantastic community of players that care a lot about the game and are willing to put hundreds and thousands of hours into, helping teach it and make it more accessible.
That's one of the best things about RuneScape. Like, we've always had that, right? The external sites have always been the best place to get it. Like RuneScape has never done a good job of teaching the complexities of RuneScape, not just PVM, the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
because you go off to like, even back in the day, you go off to like Tippet, for instance, to get all of your information.
Rune HQ.
You wouldn't get it from
Realm.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't get it from us. And I think actually, in reality, in 2022, we've got a wiki on our website, still handled externally, that our game actually links to and actively links to. If anything, I'd say 2022 we're in a better position than we were years ago. Still not perfect. I don't think it'll ever be perfect.
And I would agree with you that there are resources for those who want them or know that they exist. And I think there's definitely an issue there with many players will never know that there's an existing sub-community external to within the game. And it's sort of an issue of how you go about teaching those people how to play the game. And I do think the PVME, for example, if we're gonna get into that, is a fantastic resource. But at the same time, the existence or the need for the PVME, I think also, potentially, I would make the argument, you could make the argument that it shows a potential, I don't even want to say a failing, but a lack of intuitive learning tools within the game. Because as soon as you want to get decently good at anything, your first step is now to leave the game, go somewhere external, and then you have to read, you have to research, you have to practice, you have to implement it.
But the question there is, what is the game responsible for teaching you? Because at a certain point, you reach this barrier of meta, which is all the nuances, and every game is like this, where you get to the nuances, right? That is not taught in any game. You teach, because certainly when we're teaching, we like to teach you the tool set. So we teach you the tools and let you go to town and let the community own from there. And really, so another question I might have maybe for you,
Yeah, for sure.
is where is that meta barrier? Where is the part where RuneScape should stop teaching you? Should we teach you all of those tiny little nuances, every little bit? Is the burden of learning that on RuneScape, or is it something that should probably sit with the community as the meta shifts?
So I think endgame metas, absolutely. I think that is a perfect place for something like the PVM Encyclopedia. I think for me personally, and sort of my background, my experience, I've been teaching bosses for 10 years. That's been, my entire career started on doing that. And that is still something I, spend a lot of my time, interacting with the community. And I think the question I get the most is, how do I improve upon this? How do I do this? And it's generally not endgame meta questions. I think, and for me, what I would say is, from my perspective, the amount that is taught isn't as far as it should be, or it could be. So I think you can bring people further than you currently are. But I would totally agree with you that there is a point that, you don't want to have an ever-evolving combat tutorial that teaches you super specific tick manipulation stuff, just because, there's room for that external. And once you get to the point where you're ready to, actually implement super endgame finer points, you're probably going to be in a place where you can go to the PVME and understand it and learn it.
You raise a couple of good points there, like between yourself and John. There's a nice split in that we could do better at the early game for sure. Like, I think, to be honest, if you right click, the settings cog on your bar and say set up action bar, I'm pretty sure it gives you a really bad bar right now.
It does,
like,
yeah.
It's just not good. We could do better at giving you a bar and maybe even explaining like why we've given you that bar. So it's like, for example, we say needle strike can be used to, enhance your snapshot or whatever it shows you on the bar. We could definitely be better there. So one of the interesting things that you both covered, like where is the meta line essentially? Something that I find tricky is because people feel the need to go and find information externally. A lot of the external information is written by the experts, therefore it's not exactly beginner friendly as well. Like, it might be like, oh, here is how you get into top game PVM, but then it will say things like, oh, TC this and do that. And like target cycling as an example is like not even something we should talk about at a low end, I don't think. But again, as well, like people want to get perks, right? Invention is a whole different story to consider. And when you get into perks, it's like, there are a lot of players out there, for what it's worth, who just put any perks in their items and it's good.
Absolutely. And it's a huge barrier to entry as well, because if you want to get the best perks, you're probably finding out about that external, and then you've got the perk calculator, and it does get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just one of the perk examples to bring up is like P6 AS1, right? The reason that that's always like, without going into detail, right, we can talk about it, but the reason that people suggest that is because of offhands and switches. But then there are a lot of players who won't care about the switches. So is P6 AS1 even relevant? Maybe just P6 is relevant, for example. And I think there's a lot of information that are high end that, as we could do better for sure. But I think as well, maybe we're not. It's the typical thing we have with the same problem. When experts explain stuff, you think it's obvious, but it's not. Like, a new player looks at 10 abilities, 40 perks, 7 sets of gear, and they have no clue what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I'm an editor in the PVME as well, and one of the main focus points they have, and the thing they care about the most, there's a lot of interest in the endgame stuff, but a lot of it's for, educational purposes. People want to see what the top end rotations look like and how complex they are. But the majority of people in there are not endgame PVMers. They've got 60,000 members, and it's predominantly beginners. And it's people who are trying to improve. So they even have a guide on how to read the PVME, because a lot of it is so unintuitive, and there's a strong focus on making it more beginner friendly. But I think the sentiment within that community, within the leadership, is the game doesn't necessarily do enough to get people to the point where they can understand basic RuneScape.
If you can point me to a game that does do that, right? So we all play an awful lot of games, it's spread between MMOs, MOBAs, etc. A lot of getting good at those games is learning how to use the tool set you are given yourself, right? In my opinion, and this is obviously...
absolutely.
So I've looked at PVME, and I look at, I want to do Raksha, let's say, right? And I look at a TheRSGuy, and I'm like, it's all there. The good thing about PVME is it does offer a couple mid-level mid-level opportunities, gear loadouts, sets. But the one thing we need to remember about RuneScape is you don't really get all those gear upgrades at once, right? You get one thing and then you go and do, whatever you're doing, whether it's Vindictor or Raksha or Araxor, and you slowly fold that new upgrade in. You slowly start to see how that sort of comes to life. And players are layering each upgrade bit by bit. So, the next day they might get Relentless and learn how to use Relentless and fold that into their rotation. So I think there's a big misconception about how difficult getting into PVM is. Because yes, a lot of people will look at various streamers and how they're doing certain, we still look at speed kills on Raksha and think, we're like, what just happened? What are they doing? We have to slow down a video to 0.25 to figure out what switches they're doing. But in realistic terms, players just stagger gear upgrades and they learn how to fold them in.
It's sort of how we released it, right? So the reason why RuneScape is so complex at the end game now is because it started off simple with EOC, but we were trying, and this is thinking way back when, but basically when we made EOC, a lot of it was trying to bring the RuneScape community on the journey to kind of evolve from that point, that just click and wait system, to okay, these are now abilities, these are now cooldowns, like all these extra complex things. But the RuneScape community grew with that, and then the baseline moved, so we got a little bit more complex. Yeah. And that's certainly like how items were released, and because things are released at the end game, the progression curve of brand new player would hopefully, it doesn't, I know, but would hopefully kind of follow that learning as well. So that layer of complexity and teach a little bit more, learn how that thing works. I think one of the big things that we kind of fight with in terms of teaching a player is a RuneScape player always wants to be the best of the best. It's just ingrained in them. They just want to take shortcuts and then they get straight to the end. And if you try and do that with a RuneScape combat system, you're
going to get overwhelmed very quickly.
You're going to get overwhelmed, yeah. But if you, and again, going back to PVME, God, they're going to get big heads after this. But there's channels specifically for learn this layer, then learn this layer, then learn this layer. Yeah. But that's not what a RuneScape player wants to do.
No.
A RuneScape player and actually, it's not how you're going to get into group bossing either. They just won't let you in. They'll stick them on a DPS tracker and then they're like, no. But the idea of that they should learn bit by bit.
The page in the PVME they hate the most is the upgrade order one, because people want to know what's the next thing to buy, what's the next thing to buy, what's the best thing to buy, what's the most efficient next upgrade to buy. And just as an approach to a game that is supposed to be fun, it should be the thing that entices you, excites you, that would be fun to play around with. So there's a lot of back and forth within of like, do we even want to display this? But anytime they get rid of it, people are asking, people need this. People definitely want to follow a tutorialized.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we could vastly improve on, is laying out the stepping stones in the PVM journey a lot better.
And I think that almost calls back to what Ryan said earlier about, the bars that are provided and maybe descriptions on, hey, this ability works well with this. It's not this has to be used with this. It's a suggested, basic concept stuff that would help a player that doesn't know anything about the game build a basic ability rotation that they can fall back on.
Sorry, the interesting thing is when I made that system and we made those bars, we deliberately made them rubbish. So, and they've been improved in time, but we deliberately made them rubbish, and we made them rubbish because we wanted the player to optimize themselves. We wanted the player to go, oh, if I split this will get better. Handing them the keys to the kingdom immediately isn't always the best way.
Just makes them lazy, and
because I could hand you the best PVM setup available, right? But you haven't learned anything, and the reason why we gave them deliberately rubbish bars was so that they would kind of go, oh, if I move that, I get a bit more DPS. Oh, that works, because it's to kind of push them towards that learning journey.
So we've gone back and forth this privately before too. I disagree with that stance. And the main purpose of that, I actually don't think, logically, I think it's totally sound that you want to get people focused on learning. I think the issue that a lot of newer players have is they can't tell. if this ability moving in a different order has made a significant impact on their damage output. Whether it's tracking, whether it's analysis, whether it's intuitive, feedback within the game of, hey, this was good. This, you comboed this ability right. You got a nice sound that played. I don't think there's enough in the game that leads players to knowing what is better than everything else.
I think the biggest thing we could be doing is giving the players a combat log and showing all this output. And
there's a DPS
the
tracker in the
changes.
game, but
It's a RuneMetrics Pro
But
locked, I
yeah.
believe, and it doesn't update perfectly
But
either. It
No.
isn't
a
perfect.
combat log to say, hey, your needle strike boosted the damage of your snapshot by X.
It's something we're trying to push for.
Yeah, as a readable experience, and for players to
Yeah, there needs to
understand,
be-
And
that had an interaction with this ability and it made it stronger, is something you could easily see and go, okay, now I know to sort of combo.
And that is a perfect example of something that I personally think the learning experience for getting into RuneScape through PVM, I think it's one of the largest issues in the game. It's the thing I get asked about by far the most beyond anything else is, and I know I can speak to the other high level streamers as well that do endgame things. It's just, I can't understand how you're doing that. I need breakdowns. That's what Kyle said earlier about, 0.25xing and trying to get an understanding. And I think a little more handholding early with, your needle strike boosted your tendrils by X amount. I think things like that are absolutely huge for giving the player a feeling of understanding, what abilities do in conjunction with each other.
Well, the information's given, right? So
Not entirely.
Sometimes.
I mean,
Not
it's in
entirely.
tooltips, which require
yeah,
a
it's in
mouse
it's in
combo, which is-
tooltips, when you play any other game, you want to know what your champion does or your new character or your new class does. So you have to sort of read. There's not like a tutorial where you have an NPC talking to you saying, hey, if you use needle strike with X, then you get more damage. Like I've been sitting here trying to think of games that do that. I think one of the biggest problems of RuneScape is because there's so much input. There is actually so much. The fact that you have access to 3 classes worth of abilities. Classes means attack style in this case. And you also have access to your 28 slots in your inventory, which can be filled with items that can flick on, give another effect. There's so much input, whereas you look at a lot of games now, or older games, one of the most recent examples was New World. New World doesn't have a 12 slot action bar. It has 4 core abilities. League of Legends, 4 core abilities and a passive.
Yeah. I actually think that there are too many abilities unlocked too early.
Yeah.
Or I say early, it depends on what you class as early. Like 70 levels in our game nowadays is quick. And to be honest, I actually don't know the levels off the top of my head. But for example, the amount of times I see people have bars, they're in single combat and they're using like ricochet, like normal ricochet, or they're using piercing shot all the time. But piercing shot, correct me if I'm wrong, is irrelevant unless you're binding shot, really. Like,
for damage wise, yes, it would be.
You'd be better off needle striking or something else, or Tusker's Wrath. And I think that, of course, Tusker's Wrath needs to be unlocked, but I think that at its core, we give you obviously like basics. Sorry, we give you not literally basic abilities. Like we give you, I could think of a better word, simple abilities.
Yeah.
We give you like stuns, roots. We give you some channeled abilities. We give you AoE abilities, a bleed. Yeah, and I think that maybe we need less because it's at a high end that you start like. It's only recently, like Deadshot became more relevant because of the cape, which we purposely did, or Brad did, and I just think that, learning early, the amount of times someone says, hey, I'm struggling, and they show you a bar, and they're fragging, not walking, they're ricocheting, single target, it's not great at ricochet, so it's, and they don't know any better, and we don't help them understand that. Like, Brad Sponge.
Yeah, you can do it.
Has
spoke a lot about, you want to talk about keywording? Like,
I was going to go on to this, so when Carl brought up, we give you the information, we don't. You look at something like Dismember, it says, I do 18 to 94% damage. That doesn't mean anything because it's not doing that. Because it's not doing the same damage as a slice would do.
Yeah.
Because it's not applying buffs, it's not applying on hits. We don't give you that information.
Absolutely.
So a big thing I want to do is keyword all the tooltips. So that like if I go and Dismember, it says bleed, I can hover bleed. It says, okay, what's this? Oh, it doesn't apply buffs. Oh, it doesn't apply on hit effects. That way I have all that information. And a new player, they're not going to go, oh, Dismember, this is the best ability. It's doing more damage than this, even though it's really not.
Yeah. No, I think there's a consistency issue where certain things work with other things and in such a complex way that, it isn't easily communicatable, but because it's not there, you can actually lead people astray. Mm-hmm. And to your point, you can lead people into doing suboptimal things that they think are optimal based on the information given to them. And I think that's a
fair
problem
point.
too.
No, I do
Yeah.
agree with that, and we we have discussed it at length, like having a glossary and keywording. A lot of other games have they have a very clear set of terms that when you read it, you know that it is doing what it's doing. We do need to become a little bit more consistent with, Brad might make one reward that goes through the combat system, whereas I might make one reward that bypasses the combat system to just do damage, but we would call it.
You look at something like greater barge bleed and a bleed; they are completely different.
Yes.
When just looking at someone doing a string, you say, "Oh, it's the same thing. They're doing the same thing."
It's
But
also the same
under the hood-
animation too, right? It plays the
well,
exact
exactly.
same
But
animation
you-
as Slaughter.
Under the hood, they're completely different.
You can still do that. So like mine would be called true damage and his would be called ability damage. And that if we can keep going down that path of keywording and having a glossary that's understandable, then when a tooltip comes out that says, hey, this does 4K true damage, the player
You can check
can
in the game,
instantly
within the
understand
game,
and
and
know.
figure out what true damage is and how it works.
There is a big flip we should talk about here, which is more information isn't necessarily better, right? Like information is just text, because we did ability tooltip rewording recently. Now, again, some of them aren't entirely correct, but we tried to narrow it down to be more specific. We can talk about that as a separate topic.
That's always been an issue.
Yeah.
Do you remember how
That's a
long
problem.
Detonate didn't say how much damage it did?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing to note is that there are a lot of people we could talk. You're a big PVM, and we're all big combat people here. There are people who don't have that much of an interest in combat. Think about it, combat is, I'm not gonna 8 skills in the whole game. Add them all up.
Ballpark.
And there are plenty of people who just want to slay because they want to level Slayer for other reasons, and because of that, they don't read the abilities, and that's perfectly fine. Also, we talk about DPS tracker. There are plenty of people who wouldn't even know what a good number is. 100k DPM, this is great. Other players be like, nah, it's 500k, it's 1 million. So more information is good for those who read, but for those who don't, it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're there's a lot of vision, different
Baking
learning,
stuff into the
visual
game,
learning, and
visual.
baking it in, And I think we said this before we were rolling, but as examples of, if you could go somewhere in game, it's kind of what the Combat Academy tried to do before. I can't even remember how Combat Academy worked. There is a degree of need some visual understanding of what's going on. If I was, like you said, it's not this straightforward, I'm sure, but if I was to needle strike and snapshot, being told "great job,"
That's one of the
yeah.
best suggested abilities to
Yes.
follow needle strike.
And then maybe telling you if you've used piercing shot 5 times, for example, and they're never bound during those 5 times, maybe tell you it wasn't a great idea.
Okay,
That's sticky keys.
but-
You pressed it too many times.
But on that point, how, let's say we introduce a new threshold down the line where snapshot is no longer the best to use after needle strike,
So-
right? That's a lot of overhead for us
Well,
to
look, I think-
calculate and go.
I think you abstract it up, right? So you have keyword interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for us to say, hey, oh, great job. I mean, I guess you could
Yeah,
say
You're not saying this
you
is
just
the
do
best
a
thing,
threshold
it's just-
after doing snapshot. That's
It's
okay.
just you want to use a strong hitting ability after snapshot.
Yeah.
It does get really complicated though and subjective, because what you said about piercing shot, if you care about raw damage, it depends on what you're caring about, and in that moment, needle striking, for example, greater ricochet versus needle striking tendrils versus needle striking snapshot, we could just say, oh, you did a damaging ability next, and it is not one of the worst damaging abilities, therefore tell you it's
you
okay.
didn't fall into a trap.
Yeah.
Thumbs
But yeah, there is an argument of we would fall into the same problem we have with action bars, in that we give you action bars and you as a player look at them and go, well, they're trash now. And that's because the game's evolved and we haven't updated them to include all the upgraded abilities and stuff. So yeah, it's tricky because to do it well, for the most part, it's something we have to keep on top of. We have to evolve it. And something these guys mentioned, which is a very, very strong design point. You'll notice if you ask any designer, we focus on designing tools rather than designing the specific way to use them. Here is a bucket. There's a really good reference. Someone who worked on Sea of Thieves talked about it. They just made a bucket and said you can fill it with water and let you do what you want with it. So we make an ability that sounds interesting and let players figure out what's best for it. We don't necessarily go, oh, we're going to make this ability so it synergizes with X, Y, and Z. We do sometimes, but...
Yeah, quite often when we design an ability, it will fall into a meta. So when we designed Greater Ricochet, we pushed it into proc pushing, which is a thing
because of on-hit stuff.
because of on-hit effects in range, right? That was the reason why Greater Ricochet did the thing it did.
Mm-hmm.
So quite often when we design something, we will kind of loosely fit it into the meta, but
You don't have a specific, this ability is designed to be used. Omnipower was not specifically made to be used with Greater Chain. It was designed to be a stronger.
No, yeah, chain is a perfect example of it. It's just a tool. It was just like,
Great
hey,
Chain was just
wouldn't
made, and we just kind of sat on it like they'll use it eventually.
yeah,
They'll find
Yeah.
something for
wouldn't
it.
it be
and
cool
then
if you
Zuck
could just
comes out.
reapply abilities? And then players like you say, Zuck, perfect example. I think to be honest, when I did that Zuck mechanic, you told me to move them in closer
We
so
moved
Greater
them in
Chain
closer
worked.
to make it work.
But yeah, like it's also good for us. Sorry, this is off topic, but it's good for us as designers when something about EOC, which is great, is that it's evolved since the beginning. You know, like we can be honest, it wasn't great when it first started, but to be where it is now, I'd say we made like huge strides. It's in a really good place. You know, there are always going to be issues, but we've got to such a good place because of working with the players. Like, oh, you know, this ability sucks. Okay, so what do we consider? We consider boosting the ability, making items that boost it, or making a greater version, or whatever. And we work with the players to define what is essentially their combat. You know, we don't dictate it. We work with you guys. So yeah, we make some of the issues as well. Like we make Switchscape more of an issue if we want to talk about melee and stuff. But yeah,
That's probably a little
yeah.
technical for what we're getting at right now. But I don't disagree with you there. That there's definitely, it wouldn't be reasonable to design something and already have baked into the game, this is where this should be used. This is going to be the meta for this ability. And I think, yeah, you have to find the line of how much information is good to provide. You don't want to give too much. You don't want to give not enough. And I think the opportunity or the option as well, I think is good too. Because I think if there was somewhere in game where, to what Kyle said earlier, where you can see what true damage is, I think that would be huge because I know a number of players would use that and actually want to learn to understand it. I think the extra step and the barrier of having to go somewhere external and then try and control F and look for the thing you're looking for, I think that to me, I think inhibits a lot of people's learning experience.
Yeah. I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
Hitmarks, hit splats, whatever you want to call them. How, what's a good way of phrasing it? So at the moment we show ability damage, we show auto attacks slightly differently.
Yeah.
We show crits, we show what is yours and what isn't.
Yes.
Do you think that, I'm trying to think of a good way of phrasing it, how do you feel about the current Hitmark system? Do you think it could be better to represent any of this or help with this?
So first off, I will say I don't think that's one of the biggest issues in terms of learnability, readability. I think hit markers disappearing in large groups and only seeing a certain number and, you know, other people being able to override yours, I think is fairly significant. Do I think if bleeds had a different hit marker, it would be easier to tell, oh, here's a good example. In a group PVM situation, if I chuck a massive bleed and then you do, yours just clears mine. And that's not listed anywhere, to my knowledge. That's a really huge one that, you know, leads players into falling into a trap. And I think if that bleed was displayed differently, if hit spots were a little more streamlined, I think you'd be able to say, oh, my bleed is gone now, and someone else's bleed is there. And then, I mean, even then that's not intuitive enough in my opinion. I think more needs to be done with that. But
You'd be hard pushed to find someone that doesn't think our current bleed system isn't poorly designed. It falls into a design trap known as burden of knowledge, where you kind of, you need to know something in order to use it well.
yes.
So you have a burden of knowledge, and that's not a good thing in game design, right? Things should be more intuitive. And certainly, I think we've spoken about redesigning bleeds how many times over the years?
It's not necessarily it's essentially a fix to something
to a tech limitation from way back when, right? But we've got Greater Barge.
Yeah.
That tech limitation isn't there. We can't even argue.
Yeah.
Like
back on the point of hitmark, I think hitmarks are so crucial to games. A couple of games I can think of, the bigger your hit, the bigger the hitmark is displayed, and it pops up and it sort of does a shake, and your lower bits of damage, or you know, they just appear for a little bit and it's off, and that all ties into feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is like if you did your needle strike and then you snapshotted, boom, big hit, it's displayed larger. So there, we're not necessarily saying, hey, we need you to go into your tooltips and read how this works, but instead of visual indicator of, oh, I use these two abilities together and boom,
And
big hit appears on the screen, you then know that, oh, hang on, I did an interaction there that made my thing hit, or a crit appear.
It's a little dopamine hit.
Exactly.
For doing the right thing.
It's important. And
it's reward systems,
Yeah.
right? It's how you design pretty much every teaching tool.
touching on the dopamine stuff, if you can make things feel great, like a subtle camera shake, and you make that camera shake bigger the bigger you hit, that's you actually understand what is going on and can start to string these things together.
And to me, that's one of the big things that the game doesn't do enough of. And I think it makes combat it makes it a lot more intuitive if systems like that are in place, or even, if you make the needle strike bonus damage a separate hit. So they can see how big that number is. And not saying that's necessarily the way to do it, but they can see their bonus damage.
The trouble with buffs in RuneScape is there's so many layers. Like, think about when you're being hyper efficient, how many things layered on top of each other you're doing to make that one hit just that much bigger. Like, you are, what,
You've got like 6 or 7 different buffs,
layers deep? And like you want to have them all as separate hits or like sub hits, or, do you know what I mean? Or even in a combat log, it would be ridiculous.
Yeah, I was literally just sitting there thinking of
like it was buffed by
it goes through and it changes.
No, I was thinking just specific to abilities interacting with each other, because I think that's something we're talking about, layering on things. I think that's the base layer, is abilities themselves, raw abilities. You're not messing with special attacks. You're not messing with tick manipulation. You're not messing with switchscape. It's just raw abilities that interact with each other in a positive way.
Yeah, no, abilities is a good starting point, because just thinking about it, you've obviously got prayers and then everything else to account for. But yeah, if it's purely abilities, you definitely move in a better place. But again, the curse, like the double-edged sword, more information on screen is not necessarily better, right? So if like suddenly we go from having 6 hit marks right now, let's just say we double that and make 12 hit marks displayed. I mean, sure, high-level players are awesome, and then low-level players in group fights are like, what is going on?
I think, I'm going to reference something, and you guys can let me know if you've seen it or haven't. There was a video made by a channel called Project Combat, and they basically spent a full hour, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, going over a lot of the reasons why combat is difficult to learn in RuneScape 3. And it's a fantastic video. And a lot of it outlines a lot of the inconsistencies and a lot of the interactions that aren't intuitive or aren't properly, communicated within the game. And I think one of the major, gripes with that, it's even stuff like audio design and sounds, where certain things hit 4 times and you hear 3 sounds, and to your point and to what Kyle said earlier, big hit, good interaction, extra sound. Exactly. That's immediately makes the learning experience easier, because it's organic. The player is getting better at the game while just playing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I do personally believe, this is obviously just my opinion, that we could solve all this through visual aid, not having to go into the game and have the player open up an interface. Whilst I do I think the keyword is the glossary is separate to this. Yeah. So that is an important thing for us to have. A combat log is important for us to have. But once we have those, it is the interactions. When you use wild magic, wild magic is arguably the best looking ability and feel ability in the game. It feels powerful. Now, if that is, let's say there's an ability that combos with, and you do that, and a camera shake happens, or a bigger camera shake happens, or a spot anim happens on the opposing NPC to show that an interaction has taken place, that is a visual aid that I can start learning about, and from there, where do I take it? Do I then read the ability? Oh, what happened there? Yeah. I read the ability and then go from there.
That's a much better way to do it. Certainly, when we've made our combat tutorials in the past, a good example is Combat Academy, right? So when I made Combat Academy, I had an awful lot of things to teach, like a lot of basics to teach. And at no point did we ever want to throw a player at a wall of text, which is why the Combat Academy was you being a TA helping someone go through, because we also had to break a fourth wall. Because you can't have an NPC in game talking about abilities and cooldowns, and I think we ended up doing it with Lady Deathnell a bit. But these really UI level things that we need to explain,
it's hard to do.
It's really hard to do as a game, because at the end of the day, a game should be fun, and what's less fun than reading through reams of text? So I think these systems need to exist, and we need to kind of soft promote good behavior.
Yeah. I think it's immensely important as well.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So we could talk about some abilities that you cancel early, right, purposely at high end. Snipe or whatever else. Concentrate blast, maybe? I don't mage. Is that one?
You mean rapid fire?
Regular conk, rapid fire, assault. There are a number of abilities you can cancel a ticker.
Yeah, so peace channel, yeah. So something really interesting about that, which I'd be interested on your thoughts, are... Actually, one, what do you think about it first? Then I'll give you my...
So those I see as less of an issue. I think it is info that is not displayed in game. it is also in most cases a save of one singular game tick. So if someone is go ahead.
But do you think that information should be shared in game? You should cancel the last hit of this ability to get the most out of DPM.
I think in a perfect world, yes.
No,
But
I really disagree.
I think
very interesting.
Anim cancelling
Actually,
is a global
Yeah,
thing.
that's what I was going to talk
I
about.
think, okay, actually, I would walk that back a little bit. I think it depends on how it's displayed in the game. I think a lot of players learned how to cancel assault early because they realized if you hit your destroy, you still see the next assault hit splat. You can visually see that you're still getting that fourth hit even though you hit another ability. So, and to me, that is intuitive enough that it's like, it's clear that you're getting that extra hit splat and that canceling it didn't lose you anything. I think it's more of an audio-visual, thing where if that's displayed properly, I think that's great. I think listing it and being like, you should cancel this early, no, that doesn't make a
If we
huge
ever
amount of
put that
sense.
in, we should just make that the way the
just make
the
it the way
ability
we
Yeah,
are.
no,
works,
just
right?
shorten the ability at that point.
Yeah.
Absolutely, just shorten the ability.
The reason I ask is because naming a few games, like naming like Super Smash Bros. I mean, if you talk to anyone who plays Smash, they'll tell you about how being frame perfect for things. League of Legends, any of your typical games, they like animation cancelling becomes, it is the skill difference between like, let's just say an average player, and it is your skill ceiling, right? And from a design point of view, a lot of those cases are, you could argue they're bugs. Like, it's never intentional, but it makes the skill ceiling go up when you can like master, you feel like a true master. So they have become, I would argue, they've become a normal part of games. Like, yes, they might have been a bug, but they just get left because they add to the thing. Like, there's think about it, just League of Legends as an example. There is a champion whose entire kit, you just animation cancel the entire time, and there's such a significant difference between that. And I think that's okay. Like, your average player can snipe like normal and, like you say, miss one tick.
It's not a significant enough buff that it's like,
Yeah.
this has to be communicated. I think for the little things that give you a percent here, a percent there, I think that's fine to be a part of the skill ceiling. I think it's just getting the player closer to that. That is where the most kind of work needs to be done. If I can switch gears ever so slightly to the display of information on gear, weapons, armor, that is another thing that I think is quite problematic, because let's look at the tier 85 Hellwar Wand Orb. They are tier 80 damage. They are tier 90 accuracy. That's not displayed. It's just listed as tier 85, and then you've got the raw number that you would actually have to plug into the wiki to see what tier it actually was. And then you've got the interaction of, wait, all of your accuracy comes from your main hand, and therefore the Cywar offhand is literally a Virtus book in every functional way, but it's displayed as a tier 85 versus a tier 80. And I think that also leads people, I don't want to say leads people astray, but in the last few years, there's been an influx of weapons that have a tier, but with a different accuracy and a different damage and bonus effects. And I think that isn't problematic with regard to design, but I think with regard to display of information. The other one I'd say there too is, I believe it's still auto attack damage that's displayed for legacy mode. And the amount of people, I mean, if you look at the prices of Drygores, I believe the best Drygore currently, like objectively, would be the Mace, because it does the same damage as the others and it's got prayer bonus for most players, is the cheapest, because if you hover over the tooltip, it says it does lower damage. It doesn't actually, but and I think things like that mislead people in a huge, huge way across the board, where they don't feel comfortable making a good purchase decision.
But that, just to clarify, is that, because I'm trying to remember
Yeah, I'll
what you're
take it
talking about, the damage is lower because it's based on attack speed,
It's
right?
based on attack speed,
Which
but
is not relevant to
which is not
abilities.
evolution of combat.
Yeah.
It's not abilities.
Yeah. It gets normalized,
ability
yeah.
damage is normalized around rate 4. So
Yeah.
4 ticks.
Yeah,
That's
no,
what
fair
fastest.
point.
There's
there was-
multiple
was
things
it-
to that.
Was it Mod Jack who just wanted to replace all numbers with tier numbers?
I'm not sure.
This has been floated a while, where you just say tier 90.
I hate that. I
Yeah.
hate
Yeah,
that
you want
things
to know the
just
real
as-
numbers because they flow
Yes.
through the system, right?
like just show the ability damage they're giving out. If we're not using attack speed, like we're not currently in the system, like attack speed doesn't matter right now.
Yeah.
It might as well be removed.
Yeah,
Right now.
I think it should just say ability damage
Yeah.
as well.
There's a different route there where I think we should have auto attacks do more and actually have them mean something, but we'll get into that later. Especially for like the wand, it shouldn't say tier 95. It should say,
tier
I have
85.
a damage value of this. I have an accuracy value of this. They're the abilities. And then if we want to show the tier, don't show the tier, just show the level to equip.
It's the equip level. Elder
Yes.
Rune is the same thing, right? Elder Rune,
Exactly.
they're level 90s, but I believe they're tier like 83 or 84 with regard to how they perform.
They're not as bad because melee still shows a damage stat, where I don't believe magic shows any damage stat at all.
Yeah, because it's spell based.
Well, yeah,
it's
you've
based
got
on
the
your
addition
spell.
of, with magic and range, it's even more complicated because
Exactly.
it's added up with your ammo that's equipped and everything else. And it becomes complicated for a player to figure out what's actually better than other things.
Yeah, so with magic especially, we should say, okay, this is our damage level, and then you can go in your book and anything that's above or at that damage level, you know you're going to get that amount.
Yes.
Because
And
right now,
I mean,
it's not
that's been
intuitive at
recently
all.
changed in the tooltips. I don't know if that was one that you did, but or one of the people sitting here. But now when you hover over a spell, it says this will scale
Yeah,
up
yeah.
to tier
Yeah,
or level
I-
74.
I did that.
You did that. Yeah, that was good.
It's always worked that way, hasn't it?
Yeah,
But
it
the
ju-
only
it
way
just wasn't
you
player
know
facing.
It's
is
just a
that-
visual thing.
That scuffed big combat interface.
Yes.
But right now, when you hover over a weapon, they're just getting ridiculous because there's so much information being shown, you can't draw out what you need.
And yeah, half of it is useless information.
It's like
as
you have the damage, the level, the accuracy, the damage style, whether it's crush, stab, or slash, which again
which
we can get
also
into
doesn't
later.
matter almost
It
everywhere.
doesn't matter right now. Again, we should make that matter in my
Because
opinion.
weaknesses, don't.
Like
just for
that
those.
system
Well,
just needs
that-
a change.
That,
I think.
that doesn't matter right now because we want to go away from hit chance, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you look at what following a true weakness does, which doesn't really matter on bosses.
Yes.
But if you look what it actually does, it has a huge effect on
so
accuracy. But yeah.
That's another thing that I think also has to be Googled because I know a number of players, if you're new to the game or playing organically, monster-specific weakness intuitively means I'm going to do more damage. And that's not what it does at all. There is zero impact on your damage at all. So you'll see people using like earth spells at certain monsters with earth, and they're not doing any more damage. They're just wasting more runes. And I think that's something too. It's a communication thing for a lot of this, that it's, does this matter? Is this important info to display? And then how do you display it in a way that the player can understand if they need this or not?
Like John was saying, we want to move away from hit chance. Several of us do. Obviously, it's a big thing. But what that does mean is then, what is the better way to do this system? Because you don't just want to delete it and leave nothing there, right? Because then otherwise...
accuracy does not actually in defense is like a key
Yeah,
part of RuneScape, right?
exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's whether do we go towards that more intuitive route where, okay, I'm using earth spells against something, I'm doing more damage now. Does everything have a base level of damage reduction? And then you actually just brings that down? I think we should look into something more like that because the current system is just unenjoyable, I think.
Yeah, if only we had something
If only we had something.
on our internal documentation.
Interesting.
Cut that bit.
We'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
In relation to, we're talking about all these things that probably aren't good enough with regard to teaching PVM or could be improved or maybe should be improved. I think a follow-up question there that, might be tough to answer is there any kind of plan to look at this? As it's, it clearly is an issue. Combat learnability overall, intuitive, baking more things into the game, helping new players learn the combat system. Because it's clear just based on this discussion, it's a problem and it's important.
I think officially there's nothing written into the schedule, but it's always something that we are wanting to improve
you would
and
like
are
to do.
pushing for. It's just fitting it into the schedule, right? Because there's a whole game we need to look after. It's not just this. And I think like plenty of other places in the game, they'd want to attack these sorts of issues. So we're all pushing for it, right? Constantly.
I mean, you've got people like Sponge who are doing like, the keyword glossary stuff
Yeah,
in
and
his
then
spare
you've got-
time, and I'm super interested in Hitmarks and
You've got myself pushing it on the engine side to improve our Hitmark system because it's just the tool set just isn't good. Like I'd love to provide better onboarding. It's something that we were looking at doing. So when we made the Berthorpe tutorial, the post tutorial.
Yes.
Yeah. That was definitely done with a view to extending it as a kind of like progression track. And we actually wanted to kind of handhold the player and then slowly release the handholds until they complete Dragon Slayer. That's where we wanted to go with it.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So then you let them go then, and then the game becomes a full sandbox. I mean, you can turn off the thing.
Yeah.
That was so when we made it, that was the plan. But obviously, other initiatives come along, things become more important.
Yeah. You are all exceptionally, I mean, my experience being in here, you are all exceptionally busy and have a lot of things on your plates. And, you can't sit down and do this in a lunch break. This is not a lunch break. This is a full game scale. We need to, fix combat learnability,
It's
readability.
incredibly complicated as well
Yeah.
because every time we attack it, it becomes outdated in about 2 weeks. Like, you've got to fix it at a higher level, and
Yeah, a lot of what our jobs kind of involve, as well as we have 101 ideas. We don't have the time to even implement 10 of them. So how can we get there? Are there any short-term or iterative versions? And things like what Brad did with adding more information to spell level scaling and starting to add keywords. I think you even added range to weapons a while ago. I feel like...
I added it, and then someone on a different team did it at the same time as part of Strike.
Right.
So it wasn't actually mine that went live.
But like things
yeah,
like that,
thing.
there are little things we can do iteratively, and like sometimes you don't even realize it. But when we make bosses, we're obviously deep in combat doing various things. Sometimes we rework a little thing behind the scenes that's more preparation for in the future, and it's just like things like that. Yeah, we are always trying to do the best with the time we have. Obviously, in an ideal world, we could sit and like solve problems, but it's not always the case. So yeah, we dig away, and I think that some of the points we just discussed, like maybe some of them are more important that could be broken down smaller. Like for every ability we now make, maybe we should define a keyword with it, and then we can roll that back as and when. And like get there slowly, not just one update, everything is keyworded. It might feel a bit unorganized, but to some degree it's either that or maybe it doesn't get done
It's
at
that
all.
or not
So,
doing anything,
yeah.
and yeah, absolutely. I've got a question for Mod Sponge, Brad.
Yikes.
So you spend a lot of time in the PVME and working with the PVME, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on like how you feel about that time that you are spending, the info that you're providing them, because I think I can leak this from the PVME side of things. There are a number of devs in the PVME and JMods, and there are JMod restricted kind of channels where the top players have an opportunity to let you know about bugs or interactions or things that aren't maybe super clear. And I think over the last, let's say 6 months, you've spent a lot of your own personal time kind of going in there, going through the end game player concerns and making, you've made a lot of small changes that have meant a lot to kind of that community. So yeah, just overall, how do you feel about the PVM Encyclopedia, how they work, how they run?
I mean, like at the moment, it's there's a bunch of information obviously behind the game that isn't players facing, and players go, I think this works like this. So like to have an impact, you can just come on and go, yeah, it works like that. And suddenly like, oh, okay, now we can put that in a calculator and we can actually figure out what it does. And whilst that stuff's not in-game our side, where you can just go, oh, this is how poison exactly works, it's there somewhere for players to go through and actually figure things out. And there is a subgroup of players that like figuring every single thing out, even if they don't play the game anymore.
Yeah.
Some people just go figure out, oh, okay, I figured out it works. This is great. But yeah, no, it's a great group. Obviously, it's give and take, right? They come to me with a bunch of bugs, and I check that they're in or get them elevated if they're particularly harmful, I think is the word. But yeah, no, it is a very good thing. Obviously, it'd be good if we could get more of the things in game, so it's not third party, obviously.
There's a lot of like, I think Brad said, give and take. Like we make the game, and we know how systems work, but players, definitely at high end, know more about how the systems like work together, like what you can, animations and ability stalling, all this sort of stuff. So sometimes asking, the players how things work, it's not because like it is because we don't know like the actual like application of it. We understand how it works, and that's why it is just as useful. Like I think yesterday I asked people to tell me the best way to kill Gladecore for rare drops, and someone said, why don't you check the code? And I'm like, but I mean, it's not that straightforward. And also, players have done the calculation
You're asking the
somewhere.
players, yeah.
So
I mean, a good example is when when I rewatched the buff bars.
Yes.
And I was on PVME and asking them, which ones are actually really important, which groups are really important, and that led to the default ordering of how things are laid out in the buff bars. If you remember.
Yes, I do remember all that. Yeah, I was there for this.
So that's like you giving back to us. So in terms of you asking the question, well, you guys keep on doing this using your personal time, it's like, well, it's a mutually beneficial thing. That's why we do it, right?
Yeah.
All of the people that work on the game love the game, and we do it for the love of the game. It doesn't feel like work for us. We want to see it improve just as much as you guys do, but we've also got the business at the side to kind of tackle with, and
And
like,
you're
and
privy
as,
to
as,
the
as boring as
actual-
the business, it's like, no, we do have finite production resources, finite
Yeah,
like,
of
time
course.
resources. So like we're doing that kind of juggling, and you guys shouldn't have to care about that. We should be like the mouthpiece for juggling that. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think to shift gears a little bit here, I want to talk about something a little potentially contentious or opinionated. But what are your guys' thoughts? Just full on personal opinion on PVM macros, but I'm going to subcategorize them as well. In the high level PVM community, there are lots of players like myself don't use any macros and never have. But then also, there's an influx of players who do like macros or possibly want to use macros. Two categories. There's the basic macro where I hit one button to put on a main hand and an offhand that I think a lot of players use. And then there are the niche macros that most players don't touch, but things that will do 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 inputs kind of all at once tick perfect. And just, if we can go around the room and if you want to just, give me your thoughts on how they interact with PVMing or what their place is in the game.
So from my point of view, I see macros as an accessibility improvement. I'm a big fan of accessibility. And certainly on Pymus, I released 10 things with Pymus. Number 11 was an in-game macro system. I think the thing that's fundamentally wrong with the current world of macros is it's external. It requires you to use external stuff. And like, I think we're at a point now because we can't add any more action bars onto your screen because the action bars computationally are expensive to render.
Yes.
But certainly, like having an action bar that isn't rendered, but let's say when you press like 1 on this action bar, it presses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all at the same time on another action bar. That's something that I think could be added to the game.
Okay.
Certainly for like main hand, offhand. Yeah.
Yeah, bladed dive.
I'd love to see those sorts of things included. You raised an interesting point about it doing like 6, 7 things. At that point, you have to ask yourself really a question of, do we want mechanical skill to be a skill ceiling in RuneScape? Certainly in old school, it's definitely a thing that they've leaned into and something they definitely want. Because that's what the mechanical skill is at the end game of combat in old school, right?
Yeah, you're kind of fighting against the interface and how quickly you can switch between everything.
But in RuneScape 3, do we want that? And if the answer is no, then a macro system is the answer. It removes that mechanical barrier, which is basically why people macro, right? It's that mechanical skill. They don't have to do that every single time. So yes, for accessibility, 6, 7. That do we want mechanical skill to be a thing at the skill ceiling of RuneScape? So
my personal take, I feel very similarly to you with regard to small macros, does a couple things, main and offhand or a bladed dive switch. I don't really see those as a skill leap. It's an accessibility. I just freed up 2 keybinds because I already hit 14 buttons with my thumb and it is going to fall off. So to me, that's very different from one that gives you a tick perfect, it's like auto detonate, InGen, hammer, bladed dive, staff on kind of thing that a number of people in the Virago community use. And I think there's a big difference between the two. And I think something important for me personally on the macroing front is I think some kind of stance, whether it's the right stance or the wrong stance, I think is something that's been missing for a long time. Because I know you guys get asked about them all the time, and it's not something that you can really, there's no
we don't really
stance
have a
on
control
it. There's
over
no control, yeah.
We don't have control over the rules of RuneScape as developers. We don't set that policy. So it's
and it makes it hard to talk about them.
Yeah,
because
at the end of the day, we just want you guys to have fun playing RuneScape. That's our motivation, right? How you go about doing it. There's an argument that, well, that guy can use that third-party thing that I didn't even know about, and that now I'm having to do. Remember, manually 4-ticking is miserable, right? It's absolutely miserable. So like that's less fun. So yeah, we just want you to have fun at the end of the day. So
absolutely.
we're like, yeah, macro, we don't care. But in reality,
no, you don't make the rules of RuneScape and you have to follow them.
I don't want anyone in my PVM community to get banned. I want to grow the PVM community, not shrink it.
Yeah, no,
so
absolutely.
yeah, I'd prefer that. I'd like that.
And I think almost with relation to that, I think that does kind of point towards a simple in-game macro system being potentially really interesting, because then it's not a third party, it's not external. There's no security issue, there's no accessibility issue where it's like, oh, I mean, something I get a lot is, do I need to buy an $100 gaming mouse to be able to, £100 gaming mouse, to be able to play RuneScape? And the
That
answer
shouldn't
is,
be on RuneScape's progression curve.
the answer is no, but also if there was an in-game macro system, even less of a no. Because it just frees up keybinds. It makes the APM, a little bit lower than it is, and it's gotten higher and higher over time anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there is, again, on our previous conversation, there is middle grounds. Like, we could make a full-blown macro system, which, if you're familiar with other games, they allow you to properly write out what it is that you want to do.
Yes.
Or we could, for argument's sake, make an ability. Let's just say it's called dual wield swap, and you can assign 2 weapons to it. So when you upgrade from Ascensions to Blightbound, you have to change your assignment.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's going to we can do small versions of those things if we want to. Maybe that's it's either that or do nothing for a few years, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Maybe that is what we should do. I'm mostly in agreement with all the points. I think that it is on our minds when we're designing stuff, because when we are making new abilities, we have to say, well, that's another ability they want to keybind, therefore now where are they putting it? Because of those things. So I was trying to think about a good example before, but if you think about tendrils, there's 4 of them.
Mage tendrils?
3, all of them. So you've got mage, range, and melee, right? Let's just say hybriding was a massive thing in RuneScape nowadays.
Yes.
I mean, it actually is kind of a high level, right? But if we didn't have action bar swapping, that would be 3 abilities you'd have to put on your bar, when in reality it could have just been called tendrils, and the moment you equip a magic weapon, it turns into the magic one. There are things like that we can look at. Yeah, sorry, that's a bit off topic to your point.
No,
but there is a middle ground, things we could try to do to mitigate, to make things more accessible. Because, yeah, I'm the same. I never dual wield swap, never did, because I just didn't want to deal with the 2 extra keybinds.
I think part of the reason a lot of people macro too, it's almost like a FOMO thing, where if you feel like the person next to you has an advantage over you, it feels bad. Or I know a lot of people have and this is something we didn't even touch on that maybe we should touch on briefly. I know a lot of people feel bad learning PVM because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to mess up their hammer timing. They don't want to, this is a very specific one that's kind of funny more than anything. But the Virago World Record team, one of the people on it, the 7-man team, was muted. And I do Virago with them on occasion. And I was like, what did they get muted for? Because this seems sound guy. I don't think they're going to, break any rules there. They missed their hammer by a tick. So their team reported them and it ended up muted. And stuff like that, where there's pressure to perform in a certain way. And assigning a big 7-way macro alleviates that pressure for a lot of players.
Are they still muted?
No, it was a day long.
It's just when you were talking about it's a touchy subject to
That's
go
right.
on, because you were saying we can't really say anything because then players might take it out of context and then get banned. And literally just the other day, someone on Twitter went, "Mod Sponge, is it correct you said this, that it's okay for me to use macros?"
No.
I was like, what? Where have you got this information
Which
from?
is why the line was, it's not us. It's not on us. We don't get to choose.
The official ruling is that macros are against the rules.
One input for one action is the rule, right? But again, we're not banning for it. So our policy needs to be more upfront and honest.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much for joining in this fantastic discussion, and we will see you all in the next one.